So when you're thinking about the before word student, you can download and print and utilize this checklist for SEEKs in the coaching form that is specific to the before word stage. So what we need to think about in terms of fostering engagement in multiple ways, let's look over here at what's already working or what might already be in place. Do we have visuals, for example, for sequencing daily activities? Keeping in mind that this is a before words child, we're looking for objects of reference, the actual materials. We're looking for baskets that may be laid out in sequence, maybe photographs, but it's really nice to have those concrete real-life materials. You might want to lay them out in sequence so children can understand the progression of steps within a task. If children are struggling to stay engaged, having reminders of how to request coping strategies like a basket of comfort objects and objects to hold, visuals to make choices of materials, and finally, and most importantly for fostering engagement, does this lesson include hands-on, cause and effect, and sensory exploration? You might indicate, well, I have a little bit of that, but I think there might be room for increasing investment, so your next steps might be taking one of these items that is either not yet in place and or enhancing what you've already started to do to increase investment, initiation, and independence. You'll see similar ideas presented out for Section B and Section C in terms of presenting information in multiple ways and fostering expression in multiple ways. In reference to the emerging language stage students that you might have in your classroom, let's practice a little bit using this particular developmental checklist and coaching tool that we have for you. You might have it printed out in front of you to look at foster engagement, present information in multiple ways, and fostering expression, thinking about those unique items for each of this particular developmental stage. I'll show you an example of an integrated preschool classroom where you have a 4.5-year-old boy over here on the left-hand side. He's sitting on the fringe of circle time. He was given a visual support that's kind of just behind him that indicated it was time for him to join his peers on the rug. He came to that area, he sat down, and he grabbed a little book from that little book shelf right here, and he's reading a little book right now about Halloween. Unfortunately, it's Easter time, and they're all talking about Easter bunnies and going on an Easter egg hunt later, and he's kind of disengaged himself a little bit with that book. So I would kind of characterize his overall engagement level as emerging fleeting. He wasn't no focus. He knew to come to the rug. He's come in close proximity, and every now and then he might look up. So that's kind of a key thing to think about. Over here, where he's partially engaged, is that he's being asked to read his name. His name card has been pulled out. It's hard to see it right there, but the teacher's holding up a name card of each of the children. His name was pulled out. It said Shannon Paul. And Shannon Paul ran up and said, I want to read my name. And because he's emerging language, he can connect with that written text, and he can connect with his name being called. And that got him up to the at least responsive or partially engaged step right there. He really responds nicely to visual supports, which is kind of the key theme I wanted you to hear. So what I will have you do is then pull out that visual checklist. So in those particular images of a child in a preschool circle time activity, one of the things that I would start with by thinking is what is already in place that's working. That child knew exactly where to go from the previous activity because he had a picture schedule system and a check-in spot. It was hard to see it in the picture, but he did have visuals for sequencing daily activities. So that was definitely working for him. Then he stayed in the proximity of his peers because he had access to a coping strategy. He was able to use that book to read and kind of helped him stick around. So I guess you would say that he had some access to choices of materials that might be helpful to helping him kind of stay actively engaged in the group. As you think about other ways that might be helping this particular student, I'm going to move you down to Section C of the checklist. In Section C of the checklist, you're going to notice that there were some options for him for communication, visual reminders for how to maintain social conversation, and visuals for people's names. So have we provided visuals for people's names for him? And I'm going to check that off. We gave him his own personal name, and it really worked. We saw him go from emerging fleeting to partial engaged. So having a visual support for this particular student was helpful. What we want to see is when we go back to the image of him is that he's only at emerging fleeting or partially engaged. How might we increase his active engagement? How do we get him to mostly engage, initiating more frequently? Well, he really benefited from the visual schedule system. He benefited from having a book in front of him, and he really likes visuals, particularly with the written word on him. So if we want him to be more engaged when we sing a song and we read books, we want to make sure he has a proximal visual that's related to what we're talking about and what we're doing. And what I'll show you is an image of him when they're singing a song about colors. he's got a visual of the word of the colors that they're singing about right in front of him. It really lights him up and gets him more actively engaged. So when we're coming up with next steps for this student, we determined that things were already in place that were working based on the checklist. We thought the schedule system was working nicely. The fact that he had a book in his hand was something that was helping him with his coping. And boy, did he like looking at written words, and particularly relevant words like his name. Well, this particular song is a song about colors, about the B-L-U-E spells blue. They're singing it to the tune Hi Ho the Dario. And you'll see on his lap is the word blue, B-L-U-E. Because he loves words and letters and we've put it right on his lap, we've just moved him from partial engagement to mostly engaged by using more visual supports to get him not only hooked but also expressing himself in different ways. And this was just sort of a brainstorm from coming from the first activity to the next. Now, those types of strategies may or may not work. You go back to the checklist to keep trying to brainstorm what else we could put into place for all of the students to get more actively engaged. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the conversational level stage child. Typically that emerges around 3.5 years of age, so many preschoolers will be coming in with creative language. They can use people's names and verbs and so forth. Our goal in our learning climate is to keep using social emotional engagement to fuel their interest in people and in learning and really support their brain development. In doing so, the highest priority for our conversational level students is to build their self-efficacy and their understanding of social conventions. What is appropriate at circle time versus group work versus out on the playground? What's an appropriate vocal volume? How do I take turns with my peers? Those are some of the things we're going to naturally be teaching to our students at this particular stage. So we need to have our checklist once again so that we can look at what are the strategies that are going to be effective to foster engagement, to present information in multiple ways, and allowing multiple options for action and expression that are sensitive to this particular developmental stage. You're now looking at the conversational stage form, coaching form for social emotional engagement, knowledge, and skills. You've looked at the before words one, you've looked at the emerging language, and now this is conversational. You'll notice that you're going to have the same questions over here, but what checklist items are here are going to be more sensitive to the fact that you can use more generic visuals at the conversational stage. You don't necessarily need to have the concrete objects or photographs. You simply have visuals for daily activities or visuals for steps of the task. You might even be able to use written language at this particular point. And so it's going to be a little bit different in terms of the developmental sensibility of it. However, you're still going to make sure that the lesson includes a hook, a link to a student's interest or a social role. In the before words, it was absolutely essential that we had concrete, sensory-based cause and effect hooks to the lesson. But we're still going to want that here for the conversational level students. The hands-on or movement-based, frankly, is emotionally engaging for most human beings. Even at the adult learning phases, you're wanting things that are going to hands-on and movement-based. You're going to see similar checklist items for presenting information in multiple ways, and for section C, fostering expression in multiple ways. When we're thinking about our conversational level students, fostering engagement still needs to be at the top of our list. How do I get their brains actively engaged socially and emotionally in my lesson plan? As we've mentioned many times, some children are going to be socially and emotionally engaged just simply looking at you. They're going to get all lit up and excited because they've got a teacher in front of them. But other children tend to be less interested in people. So using props, materials, acting things out, movement, role play is a great way to get the emotional hook. This particular teacher has never failed to excite me. She's coming in costume to circle time quite a bit. As you can see, you've got the big, extra big glasses, the hat. She's just read them a story, and she's basically dressed up as one of the characters in the story. And what you see are children literally wanting to be in her lap because she's so engaging, not only socially, but also even in the non-social realm. She's got some interesting objects that she has up in front of her. So engagement and getting the emotional hook is going to remain so important at the conversational stage. In terms of providing information in multiple ways, social expectations are really difficult for children to just infer in the social context. When I'm sitting at my desk and I'm feeling really stressed out because I don't know what the expectations are, what can I do about it? How about we present information in multiple ways? We might have told them once at the beginning of the year. You can always raise your hand to ask for help, or you can turn to a peer buddy and communicate with them. But having a visual right there on their desk of when I feel a certain way, whether it's angry, mad, sad, frustrated, I can take a deep breath. I can blow on my soup, which is just an example of sort of a deep breathing exercise. Squeeze my hands together. I can stretch. I can talk to a teacher and I can feel better. Obviously, you can customize that to some of the priorities in your classroom, but having a visual right there on each of the table groups is a great way to remind students of the behavioral and social and emotional expectations of the class. Finally, in section C for the conversational level student, there's a couple of concepts here. We want to make sure that we're giving them visuals to help them engage and express. When they're learning how to read, it might be nice that they're learning how to read in a meaningful way. This particular student is actually forming sentences as he reads, and then he's going to act out on those sentences. So he's learning to read the word hug. He gets to pick a peer at the beginning of the sentence and form the whole sentence, and then he gets to give a big hug to his peer who's waiting right around. Also having visuals proximally. Proximal is kind of right on their laps during circle time so that they can stay actively engaged during our circle time activities is going to be key as well. This is an example of a vocal volume meter. So if you are in a classroom where vocal volume modulation is a concern, which is pretty much every classroom in every school I've ever been in, is making sure that you can present information in multiple ways and let students know the expectations up front. On the green side is where you might see expected vocal volume, and you could grade it on a scale of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you put the arrow there. Then the blue side is what's actually happening, what that you actually hear. So you'll be able to say, I was hoping for a 2, but I'm hearing a 3. It's helping students understand the concepts of numerical sequence and the functional use of them. But another way to just communicate, I needed to quiet down without having to use a negative or sharp tone of voice with the students. This particular vocal volume meter is accessible through this particular website, amy-laurent.com, one of the co-authors of an assessment protocol that I have developed with Amy. And she has many downloadable supports that are going to be great ways to provide information in multiple ways or foster expression in your students. So I wanted to practice. Let's do this one more time with the conversational level stage. We're going to get our conversational level checklist out in front of you, and we're going to look in the classroom setting, and we're going to see what is already in place that this teacher is using to foster engagement, to present information in multiple ways, and to allow multiple options for action and expression. Let's use that checklist to figure out, I wonder what she's already got going, and are there any opportunities for increased initiation, investment, and independence? Are there opportunities to get that social emotional engagement? This is an example actually of a first grade math lesson I wanted to share with you. And you have 22 students in this class, a conversational level boy right here close to the camera. And then you have obviously 6- and 7-year-old children all excited to learn a math lesson. The teacher's trying to teach them the concept of coin denominations and trading up values. So she's teaching them 5 pennies is a nickel, 2 nickels is a dime, 2 dimes and a nickel is a quarter, and so forth. The goal is to get $1. That's your goal of the game. They're going to break into groups of 2 and play the game independently with their peers. They're each going to get a bank of coins, and they're going to get a dice. And as they roll the dice, they get to determine how many pennies they pull out to trade up toward nickels and dimes and so forth. And so we're looking at this baseline, image right here, and one of our targeted students here, closest to the camera, is a partially engaged student. He will respond to the teacher if she calls his name. He's sitting as he's supposed to be sitting, but not initiating and not really showing a lot of emotional excitement. You have one student who's in complete fetal position. I call that an emerging fleeting student. He's kind of disengaged at this moment, but he'll be back. So that's kind of a child who's coming in and out. It's hard to see, but there's a boy in a red shirt in the far back. I call him Disco Boy. He just dances the whole time. So these children are kind of all over the place when it comes to their overall active engagement level. There are certainly some children that are more engaged than others. So we've got a lot of things that are working. This is going to lead us to this particular slide, back to our checklist on what is working to foster engagement in these students. And so did she get the emotional hook? Let me go back to the image right now and let's assess that. Are these kids excited about doing this math lesson? Did we get their hook? And I gauge that by the fact that they're looking toward her, they're crawling toward her, they want to be a part of her. They're excited about this. They're just in unusual body positions. Doesn't mean that they're not engaged. I think, in fact, the fact that she used real-life materials, that they were each going to get their own bank of coins and they were going to get to work in a game together as a group, got the emotional hook. And I think the fact that the lesson included a hook, connecting it to something meaningful, to real life and hands-on kind of activities. So actually those final 2 sections right there are going to be things that are clear strengths for this particular lesson. She's also presenting information in multiple ways. She's not just telling them 5 pennies is a nickel, 2 nickels is a dime. She's actually pairing her verbal language with hands-on materials and role play. She's going to give them a chance to watch her do the game right off the bat. And is she allowing multiple options for action and expression? She's giving them opportunities for them to engage with their peers. And so you're going to see them break into groups, and that's a great opportunity to get students to show what they know about 5 pennies is a nickel, 2 nickels is a dime. So then we'll go back over here and think to ourselves, though, is there an opportunity to increase the student engagement levels here? Could these students be initiating more? Could they be more independently engaging in appropriate behavior? Could they be more emotionally invested? I think the question posed would be, I wonder if they could initiate more during this group instruction time. Perhaps that would let them be more comfortable right here. Right now they're so eager to get started, but they have no way of initiating. So that might be an area to explore. And so let's think about next steps. How do we get there? I'm going to take you back to your checklist. If we want them to initiate more during that large group activity, let's scroll down to section C where it says allowing multiple options for action and expression. And think to ourselves, when they were sitting there kind of tied up into a knot, a fetal position, doing disco moves, did they have a visual in front of them that would allow them to point to 5 pennies is a nickel, 2 nickels is a dime? Because if they had a visual right there in their hand, that might get them initiating more and making them feel more comfortable. So that would generate a next step. And we can place a visual in their hand. The teacher during the coaching session actually said, well, I don't want to create 22 visuals. How about I create 11 of them? And they break into groups of 2 during the group instruction time, and they have to share and kind of collaborate while I'm giving them the instructions. It's a beautiful idea, because now you're going to see the social engagement together as pairs, as well as that visual support. So as you look toward next steps, the next time they did the lesson, they shared a visual support that basically said 5 pennies is a nickel, 2 nickels is a dime, and so forth. And what you're seeing is the targeted student, who is the boy kind of farthest away from the group at the baseline, is now connecting with a peer. He's initiating, he's showing some emotional investment, and they are independently engaging in appropriate behavior now, simply because of a proximal visual support generated from the checklist. So you can see the universal impact that this has on the classroom. So that kind of gave you hopefully an idea of one of the key social emotional priorities for each of the stages, the before words, emerging language, and conversational stages. And you now have checklists that are used for mentoring teachers to teachers and so forth, to look at what we're already doing to foster engagement, present information in multiple ways, and get expression going in each of our students, but also some ideas of where we might go next to foster social emotional engagement in developmentally sensible ways for these developmental stages. You're welcome to use these checklists in your classrooms and in your schools. That is a part of the coaching process. The next video module is going to be on specifically how do we measure our growth in social emotional engagement? How do we use that student engagement ladder to measure whether a student is at a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, and so forth? So that student engagement ladder will be a tool for you to gauge your success and also identify opportunities where there might be chances to infuse more instructional strategies into that learning lesson to increase student engagement. Stay tuned for future video modules, as you will also be learning how to actually mentor one another in coaching and mentorship sessions. Thank you for joining, and stay tuned for the next video module.